Hi, it's Susanna and Jarrett. As we look to finish recording Season 3 of the Well-Trained Mind podcast, we want to do another question and answers episode. Last season, we so enjoyed receiving questions from you all. So if you have a question for me or for Susan Bauer, send it to podcast@welltrainedmind.com. That's podcast@welltrainedmind.com. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can on the final episode of this season. Thank you so much for your participation. Now enjoy the episode.
Hi, I'm Susan Bauer, co-author of The Well-Trained Mind.
And I'm Susanna Jarrett, editor at the Well-Trained Mind Press. And we're talking about education for all parents and for all children in all sorts of settings. And today we are going to be talking about the college search and admissions process, specifically for homeschoolers. And we have some professional help for this discussion. We're joined by Holly Ramsey and Michele Evard. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Holly and Michele have recently published a fantastic book titled College Unmazed, Your Guide to Design and Document Your Homeschool, which I will link in the show notes. Be sure to check that out. But Holly and Michele, maybe you can introduce yourself for our listeners. Tell us a little about who you are and what your passions are as far as supporting homeschoolers in their college and high school journeys.
Sure. So I'm Holly Ramsey. Thanks so much for having us on your podcast. I'm really excited to get to talk to all your listeners today. And I have been involved in homeschooling or alternative education my entire adult life. So I graduated from Chapel Hill with a master's in teaching and for a brief time taught in the public schools in a program, a Coalition of Essential Schools program within a public school. So I was doing some interesting alternative things within the public schools, then had my own children. So I homeschooled my own 5 children across 20 plus years and 3 different states. And then when my kids started to leave the home, I started to get a little bored. So I started working for Brave Writer and taught homeschoolers online in their writing courses, taught just about every college, high school essay class they offer and college admission essay. And in 2017, I realized that not only was I giving advice to friends, but friends of friends and friends of friends of friends about how to apply to college as a homeschooler. So at that point, I started my independent education consultant business, Thoughtful Homeschooling, and have just been having a blast helping homeschoolers nationwide ever since.
So I'm Michele Evard, and I've always been interested in learning. And you can't talk about learning without talking about learning something. So math and computer science are things that I loved and what I studied originally. I thought I'd be a teacher, but more than wanting to teach, I wanted to help people learn. So I studied at MIT at the Epistemology and Learning Group with Seymour Papert and talking about how kids learn really when things are meaningful to them and when they can share construction that they've built, whether it's an essay or a Lego construction, right? And fast forward to finishing my doctorate, and I then had my own children, and I couldn't put them into schools so that I could work on reforming schools. So I ran homeschool cooperatives and did that for many years, right? So they homeschooled from birth, but I'd say all parents are helping their children learn from birth, right? Yeah. Then all along the way, I've been helping other families and translate what we do, how we help our children learn into academic terms so that other people can understand it too. And I too, as my kids got older, I was focused on what each one of them needed at the time. And as the younger 2 graduated, and I was thinking, what am I going to do next? And like Holly, I realized I was helping a lot of people homeschool and helping people document. And somebody said, there's a business to do this. And I said, what's that? And so I found the Independent Educational Consultants Association, and their code of ethics was really important to me. So through joining the association, a lot more people, and the pandemic, a lot of people were saying, can you help these families homeschool? Mm-hmm. So instead of just doing the college piece, I've been helping people learn how to homeschool in the first place.
Hey, Susanna, maybe we could put a link to that association in the show notes. I think that would be a really important thing to do. And let me just say that I am so excited to have both of you guys on. When I go to homeschool conferences, I see a lot of people giving advice about college and college applications who haven't haven't really been all that involved in traditional higher education. And that bothers me because, I have a PhD. I taught in the state university system for 18 years. When you're actually immersed in higher education, it gives you an entirely different perspective. And I think that's so important for homeschoolers to hear and learn and appreciate. So I'm just so delighted that you guys have this expertise to share with us.
Thank you. We both love IECA. There are two main organizations that an educational consultant can be a part of. IECA is one, and we're in that organization. HECA is the other. So if a family is considering bringing in some help, I do think it's important that they choose someone who is part of an organization. And the reason for that is, and I think Michele would agree, we get so much continuing education and exposure to hundreds of college admission reps every year. And why that's important to your audience is that even if they never hire an educational consultant, we are doing advocacy work on their behalf. So it is very easy for us to go to a college and say, this stated policy you have for homeschoolers makes no sense. And in fact, people from this state cannot even comply with this. This requirement does not exist. So just know, even if you never encounter one of us personally, I do feel like the couple dozen of us who do this professionally nationwide are helping all homeschoolers.
That is so good to know. So we will continue to promote hiring qualified people if you're going to hire people to help you with this process. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one of my favorite sort of classical rhetoric things, which we're going to do positives and negatives, pros and cons, do's and don'ts. So we want to start with some don'ts, things that parents should not do when they're thinking about the whole college application process. And I have to say this very first one is one that I feel passionately about, and it is don't worry about what college your third grader can get into. And all of us with older children are like, But I do a lot of consulting with homeschoolers, and I cannot tell you how many parents are fretting what their third and fourth and fifth graders are doing because they're afraid they won't get into a good college. And it drives me crazy. So can you guys address this fear for us?
I mean, I understand the fear because, there's this model of, well, if your kid doesn't get into the right preschool, they can't get into the right kindergarten, then they can't get into the right, elementary, middle, high school, college. And that's a really sad view of the world, even if in some cases it feels very true. The joy of homeschooling is we're creating a unique education for our child and with our children. And you can't see where they're going necessarily from the beginning.
Oh boy, you can't.
Yeah. So it's not a fixed path, which is part of the joy of it. Being so focused on where you hope to get eventually takes away from being where you are.
Yeah, I would even go so far as to say there are a couple things you can do to make sure your third grader gets into that college they want. And it's exactly what Michele has brought up. Maintain joy and invite curiosity. If you are doing that in the early years, you are going to have an engaged student with authentic interests. What college isn't going to love that?
Yeah. That reminds me of, we talked a lot about classical education on this podcast previously, and we talk about the stages of a classical education. And if you are interested, you can check out in our first season, we go through each stage, but it's the rhetoric stage or roughly high school where students tend to be more naturally interested in developing this who am I persona that we'll talk about later in this podcast is important for college admissions. I remember when I was in elementary and middle school, my interest in my own academic life was mostly limited to how can I get this work done so I can go back into the woods. And I spent a lot of time as a kid just playing outside. I didn't have necessarily structured extracurricular activities until I was a little bit older. And I'm just so thankful my parents didn't push for that because it didn't matter. As I became a high schooler, I was more naturally interested in, okay, I'm a writer, so I'm going to write for magazines. I love history, so I'm going to volunteer for a local history organization. But I wasn't being pushed into that before I was asking for it and I was wanting to do it. I was just playing outside all of elementary, all of middle school, and having fun educational experiences that without any pressure to build a resume.
Well, there are really two aspects here that we want to pull apart. And Holly and Michele, maybe one of you wants to speak to each one of these. One is the educational philosophy part of it, which is, again, the reason why we're doing this is so that our children can become whole human beings. And that involves so much more than the courses they take. But then there's also sort of a practical, more administrative side of it, which is a college admissions officer will never know what your child did before ninth grade. That's all invisible. It's gone. It's nowhere. And so maybe you guys could speak briefly to each one of those parts of the fear.
You have to have Michele talk on the philosophy first. I'll take
Michele, talk philosophy with us.
How much time do you have? The educational philosophy. Think about when your child is little and they're learning to say, wash their hands, right? Mm-hmm. We wash our kids' hands. When they're tiny, we're washing everything, right? Mm-hmm. And then eventually you're holding them up to the sink and helping them wash their hands. And then you're teaching them to step up on the stool and making sure they use the soap and all that. And finally, hopefully, they're doing it on their own. You never even see it, but they've done it, right? All along, you've provided the scaffolding, the stair steps, so make it possible for them to go from where they're at to where they can be. Mm-hmm. So this is the Vygotskian's theory that you're using scaffolding. We're giving that extra little step that helps a child go from where they are to the next step, which I love that you can do. You can't do it easily in a class, if you can at all, in a class of 20 kids, right? This is something that homeschooling enables us to do, is to see where our children are at and see what it would take to get them to the next level. Sometimes they know they need a stool, right? Sometimes they know. I had a kid ask me for a textbook. I had a kid ask me he wanted to diagram sentences, right? Because I had the tools available in the home and in our discussions, they knew that they could ask for those things and do it time that it was appropriate for them, right? I will confess, like I said, I've got 3 kids homeschooled from birth. One chose high school. She chose a brick and mortar high school for 2 years and then a boarding school for 2 years. A boarding school that was very like homeschooling. She milked cows at 5 a.m, but it was still, not at home, right? Because I was following child-led learning. Yeah. What they needed when they needed it was really core to my philosophy.
Yeah.
And turning to the administrative tasks, I think there is some mourning for homeschool parents because we're incredibly invested in our children, right? And we take this journey with them and we love the journey. So then when we turn to creating our documents, sometimes we want to give college admission officers the entire journey. And it's not that they don't care, but they really want to focus on the high school years.
Right.
So absolutely what you said, Susan, about what you do, particularly in the classroom prior to grade 9, it doesn't matter. You may have some middle school credits that count for high school classes. That might be one little exception, but maybe do what you want. And then I know we're going to talk later about how you present that to college admission officers, but they for sure do not want the full 18ers.
No, absolutely not. And I often say to parents, when you are acting out of fear of what might happen, as opposed to appreciation for what is happening right now, that's where you make the wrong decision. And I do feel like a lot of times parents with younger children are making these choices out of fear. They're going to be behind. They're not going to be as far ahead as everybody else. I'm going to get into 9th grade and be like, oh no, we've left something out. And as parents, we are raising the whole child, not just the future college student. And we have to breathe and look at that whole picture with a little bit more trust that they're going to find their way.
Something else I see that I would just want to offer a little bit of peace to listeners about is sometimes I see parents creating a mythical child that they compare their own child to. And what I mean by that is they will see, child A, who is a gifted piano player. They'll see another kid who is a gifted mathematician. They will see someone who is incredible in the fine arts. And then suddenly they expect their own child to encompass all of these discrete, wonderful traits they've pulled from 5 or 10 people. They want to roll it up into their one kid, and it leads to stress for the parent. That's unnecessary. And I have to believe that's got to be a pretty stressful life for a child to live. Well,
Holly, you remind me of, and I know we need to get on to our next point here. Listeners, I hope you're on a really long, maybe on a 15-mile run as you're listening to this, training for a marathon, so you can follow us through to the end. When I do a whole seminar on burnout, when, the point where you get to, you're like, I just can't possibly do this anymore. And one of the things that I recommend to parents, and I would say actually to mothers in particular, because I just think as women, we are constantly fighting the outside gaze in a different way than men are, particularly when we're dealing with parenting issues. I say, I want you to go away and I want you to write out on a piece of paper what you thought homeschooling was going to be like. And I want you to be completely honest, because you're going to burn this. Nobody is ever going to see it but you. Write down exactly what you thought homeschooling was going to be like, and then note all the places where the reality is departing from your expectations, because unarticulated expectations are the death of a dream. It just kills your ability to actually do what you're doing with joy. And I hear you saying the same thing there. You've got to look at your kid and be like, okay, this is going to sound bad. I'm going to say it anyway. You're not who I thought you were going to be. That's just the first part, though. Then the second part is, who are you? Because this is going to be so much more than I thought, more than I could have imagined. And yeah, that's a difficult thing when you're a parent.
It is. And you mentioned trust. And I'll say in this really literally, while my children are in their 20s, this morning in the car, my husband and I were talking, and I said, it's a good thing I'm not still homeschooling, maybe, because these kids I was been working with in the last couple of weeks have done all these amazing things. And I'd be like, hey, to my kids, why don't you try this or that? And I said, but in reality, back then, I was having the same thing. Because every time you see another kid doing something, you're like, oh, mine could do that too. Mm-hmm. Well, sure. But none of us can do everything. Yeah. And you said something really key about trusting your child. This is so important to the foundation. Kids want to learn. You think about a baby, they want to learn. It doesn't change when they're 6 years old until adults, try to tell them that learning is what happens at a desk in school with worksheets, right? If we keep that curiosity alive, if we keep that learning is joyful, then they do too. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And maybe your kid is not ready to read at 6. Okay. Maybe they'll be ready to read at 9 or 10. And okay, the mythical child that we try to force into a school mold, we have, all of these benchmarks we try to match. But the older people get, the more we diverge and have our personal strengths.
And we'll be right back.
The Well-Trained Mind Academy, founded by Susan Wise Bauer, offers live online instruction and classical teaching methods that fit your students' educational plan. Our instructors are highly qualified in their fields and have years of experience in teaching, tutoring, and homeschooling. We work closely with students, parents, and instructors to create an educational environment that fits the needs of each family. From calculus to Japanese to essay writing to medieval history, the Well-Trained Mind Academy offers 150 courses for grades 5 through 12. Visit WTMacademy.com to learn more.
Well, okay, clearly we're going to have you guys back on to talk about parenting and educational philosophy, because there's there are about 7 things that you just said there that I want to talk about. But what we have promised our listeners is that we're going to talk about college admissions. So I'm going to pull us back onto the straight and narrow, away from the beautiful green paths that we were getting ready to wander along. And we're going to do our second don't, which is don't worry about getting into a and I'm doing bunny ears here, quote unquote, Ivy League school, which here again, I feel like this does tend to be more of a preoccupation of parents with younger students because they've still got like this whole world out in front of them and they're like, we're going to do the best of the best of the best of the best. And Ivy League is sort of a shorthand for they got into the best possible college. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about the quote unquote best colleges. How do colleges get labeled best?
Well, this is a really interesting industry, right? The higher education industry.
I think the word industry needs to be emphasized here.
Yes, because it's one where parents in particular, but I think this is fostered by the schools at times as well, are relying on perceived status. And that perceived status is not always linked with educational outcome. In fact, it can be really difficult to see if any educational progress has actually occurred. So if you only accept the top 1% of students from the top 1% of wealth in the country, is it a surprise that those graduates do phenomenal things? Probably not. So I think that is that status that is so ill-defined and hard to back with data, although Michele and I each have recommendations of how you can get to, some more data-based information. That's one thing. And then, of course, the rankings, the U.S. News and World Report rankings have, most parents don't realize that was a way to revive a failing magazine and now has become a great, a wonderful moneymaker for U.S. News and World Report.
I'm really hoping we have a link for that we can put in the show notes.
Oh, we will.
Well, we do have I think we have a link for them on the methodology. So,
Oh, sure.
Michele,
Yes.
do you want to speak to that a little bit? Just like the methodology of the U.S. News and World Report. It's people put such stock in this ranking, but do they know what goes into the ranking?
One of the things that goes into the rankings is what other college admissions deans and presidents think of your college. Yay.
Let's rank homeschools that way. Ask me what I think of your homeschool, and then we'll rank it.
Yes. And knowing that you're going to rank the competitor's school. Yay. That's fun, right? And they're going to rank you back. Not only that, they count how many people get accepted to the school, how many people apply, and how many people are accepted.
Right.
So the more that apply and the fewer that get accepted, well,
the
higher your rank is,
better the school is. And this is something we covered in a previous episode. And many people don't know that this is the case, that being a selective school not only means that you just accept a really small percentage of people to apply, but then also the school can control that by encouraging students to apply who don't have a chance of getting in.
That's right. They can send you those postcards. Oh, please. And personalized, right?
Yes,
Susan, please apply to my biology program.
Oh, my goodness. My daughter just graduated. My youngest child finally finished college, graduated from college in the spring. We had a big party. It was not a party for her. It was a party for me and Pete. And it was called the last tuition payment party. But when she was applying to college, she was in, and she's a good student, but she's a good student. She got so many postcards, personalized postcards, almost promising her that if she applied, she would get in. It was really, and that's terrible for a kid. It's so deceptive and manipulative.
And really discouraging for the parents, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Because not all parents spend most of their waking hours thinking about college admissions like Michele and I do. So we get those little marketing pieces and we're like, yeah, we know what this is. But a parent who's just going into this process for the first time can be very wowed, like, oh, Harvard wants my kid? So it's deceptive for the parents as well. And it irritates me.
Yes. And all of those admission fees go to the college.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So it's a moneymaker as well.
U.S. News and World Reports also ranks the best places in the world to visit. So are you going to pick your vacation based on that list?
Yeah.
Number one, world's best place to visit is Paris. If you're looking for a beach vacation, Don't go to Paris, right? So it really, but people don't look at that with college. They don't say what's going to fit me when they're looking at rankings, right? It's more important to think, who are you as a whole, as you, the student, the whole person? And I mean, academically, socially, financially, spiritual, the whole thing. Who are you? Where will you thrive? Where will you learn to be the best person you can be? That matters more than any national ranking.
And you know that this pressure is really insidious. So I know that for my children, I mean, I was in higher education, so I had a little bit of a, I could see how the sausage was being made. So for me, it was less of an impulse to say, apply to an Ivy League school. And what we said to our kids was, you can apply either in-state or somewhere that we can pay for because you're not taking out any loans. That for us was a huge, huge part. And all of my kids ended up going to in-state schools. And it was a great experience for them. But at the same time, I would go to New York to meetings with my publisher. And when you are in publishing in New York, you go to parties where everybody went to Princeton or Yale. And the first thing they say when they know you have high school kids is, well, where are they going to college? And you're kind of like, because all of their kids are going to Princeton or Yale, usually early admission. And when you tell them that your kid is going to a state university, and again, my oldest son went to UVA. Okay, UVA is not a slouchy school, but you get this immense sense of, the best they could do is a state school. And I felt it. Now I was, secure enough to go back to my hotel room and think, okay, once I leave Manhattan, this is not going to matter anymore. But it's a real phenomenon to feel that pressure.
It is. And, plenty of students have aspirations for a degree beyond the bachelor's. So a lot of students are thinking about a master's or pre-professional program. And sometimes I think there's also a misplaced worry that if I don't go to X school undergrad, then my whole grad school, potential is shot. And Michele, I know your PhD is from MIT. Where's your undergrad?
Andrews University, a Christian college in Michigan. And then my master's is from the University of Oregon. So I've been in all three, those three kinds of educations. And each one benefited me in different ways.
Well, I can do you one better than that. I think most of our listeners know that I went to Liberty University in the 1980s. Yes, I did. Because, well, look, my parents didn't know anything about higher education and it looked good. And my grandfather, who was a really faithful Southern Baptist, was like, Jerry Falwell will take care of my granddaughter. It was a whole thing. Liberty was a terrible undergraduate education. And you know how much that mattered when I applied to grad schools? Not at all. Absolutely zero. That's right. Michele and I are both making zero signs with our hands right now. They didn't care. They looked at my grades. They looked at my writing. They looked at my GRE scores. I got into every graduate program that I applied to. It didn't matter. And I mean, now nobody would know where I went to undergrad if I didn't tell them.
Right. That's right.
Right.
Same thing with SAT scores.
Yeah.
I don't remember mine.
Yeah, exactly. And it also depends on the program, right? Sometimes like I was working with a kid who was really into math and definitely wanted to go on on and on in math. And I was like, well, have you looked at St. Olaf's? Like they send a whole lot of people from undergrad end up getting their PhDs. Well, of course, the family had never even heard of St. Olaf. So you got to find that best fit place. And I know we're going to talk more about that.
Well, we are. And we should talk about this because there are so many good colleges in the United States. There's so many. And in many cases, it's not going to be the greatest thing for a kid to go several states away. I am a fan of, if you're going to send a kid to college, yes, let them go ahead and move out and have the college experience. That's part of growing up. But, I got to tell you, my youngest was at a college in Virginia. She went to Hollins University in Roanoke. When COVID hit, you know how glad I was that I could get to her in a 2.5 hour drive, because other schools that she looked at were 6 or 8 hours or a flight away. And it's huge for particularly a younger student to be able to get home if they need to get home. It's huge for a younger student to be somewhere where they're not overwhelmed. I know that one of the things that I saw recently on my Facebook page is I posted a link to an opinion piece from the Washington Post about how the quality of teaching is not even something that college rankings encompass, and it's absolutely not. Nobody pays attention to the quality of the teaching. And I had so many people post and say the best educational experience my kid or I ever had was at a community college because I had a passionate, dedicated instructor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. My two of my kids took community college classes while in high school and had great relationships. And one had a mentoring relationship. She got to be supplemental instruction leader. It's like a TA position working with this professor who suggested, let's do some research together at a community college. It was wonderful for my daughter.
I think sometimes it's hard to convince families that a smaller institution offers the same degree of opportunity. And so I know part of what both Michele and I do is actually just help educate families about the benefits of oftentimes smaller institutions where a student can get to know their professor well. They have a lot of opportunity to get involved in research as an undergraduate. They are known. So if they are going on for even, further education, their letters of recommendation are personalized and tailored. So I think there's so much to be said for that. And, there's the whole colleges that change lives, a group of, I think it's up to maybe about 45, 46 smaller institutions that provide excellent liberal arts education. But it's not just those 45 or 46. There's hundreds of smaller schools in the country that are doing that, and people just don't know their name. Now, they need to do their due diligence on the place's finances, right?
Absolutely.
Higher education's being squeezed, and we can talk about that if you want. But there's so much beyond the 50 names that every parent knows.
Sure.
And I love that what y'all are doing here is I hope for our listeners, taking off some pressure and giving some peace by pulling the curtain back on the industry of ranking colleges, that really it's about finding the right fit for your child, whether that's, the school nearby, whether that's a small liberal arts school. Holly, I think you mentioned that you guys have a resource that you like for finding a right fit college for your student.
Oh, well, there's a lot of different resources we like, but one I was thinking about as you were talking is actually there is a sort of create your own rankings that the New York Times has come up with, which is a slider bar on a bunch of different factors, and you get to set the criteria.
Oh,
and
what a fantastic idea!
Yeah, and so that's available through the New York Times website. I like that one a lot. Georgetown has a great chart too. That's a return on investment chart, and they rank 4,500 institutions in that chart.
Nice.
So I think those are some really great ways that people can begin to make their own list. But Michele, you probably have some ideas as well.
Oh, I was just thinking, I think I've got some linked in my resources on my website. There are questions also about finances. What colleges will be generous with financial aid? Right? Thinking about if you've got a lot of documented need, right? If you fill out the federal form, the FAFSA, and it comes back with, oh, your family can't afford much for college. There's some colleges that are super generous, and there's some that always leave a gap that, you need to fill somehow. And often that's by loans because they've already calculated your student can work and you can contribute this much, et cetera.
Right,
and that can lead us down to really dangerous paths. So keeping aware of what the cost would be is also important.
There's a smaller group of colleges that are listed on the website, which will also link, colleges that change lives.
Yes,
that can give you just some other options to possibly look at, and also don't forget about just networking. I love it when parents get on our message boards at Well Trained Mind and say, what experiences have you guys had? How did your kid do? What was your kid studying? What was their experience? Actually hearing from someone that's got personal experience with a school is so much more valuable than a ranking in a magazine.
Well, and just picking up on tying together, Susan, both what you and Michele are saying is you also have to realize that college lists will look radically different family to family based on whether that is a family that is going to get a lot of need-based aid or somebody who is chasing merit. Those lists are almost entirely separate. And Michele spends some of her time in Massachusetts, and their educational financing organization, MEFA, MEFA, they've got a great calculator on their site, a SAI calculator, Student Aid Index calculator. I think every family should go to that before you make a college list. You need to know what your SAI number is,
right?
Because that can provide a starting point. Like, oh, okay, I do fall in the needs bucket, or oh no, I'm not going to get a dime other than the $5,500, unsubsidized loan that everybody gets.
And it's so important to know that before you get your heart set on one particular school, before you get your heart set, which leads us to our next don't,
right?
Which is that, and the note that we made here on our show outline, we do have an outline, people, even though we sound like we're just talking, is don't become emotionally invested in a particular school until you've received the acceptance letter and the financial aid package. And the thing that strikes me about this is there's two yous in it. You, the parent, absolutely stop it. Just to quote Bob Newhart, stop it. Do not get your heart set on your kid going to a particular school, because that is the worst kind of parental wish fulfillment and the most pressure you can possibly put on a kid. But I also know that kids can get their heart sets on school. And sometimes it's because of something that someone in the family has said, but sometimes something just grabs their imagination and they decide when they're 12 years old that they're going to go to school X, and they get the banners and they get the sweatshirts. Kindly and gently discourage this, because getting into any particular school is a moonshot. Do you guys want to talk about that for a minute?
I would say getting into the ones that everybody knows their name, right? Those are more likely to be the moonshots. Also, the Ivy League was a sports league, right? So those colleges, those 8 colleges, are very different. You hear on the news, oh, this kid got into all 8 Ivies. And I'm like, yeah, they're not going to be happy at all 8 Ivies, right? Dartmouth and Princeton and Yale, and they're all different schools with different strengths for different people, right? But going beyond the ones that accept just 1%, 3%, 5%, most colleges accept most applicants. So do not think there's not. And I will tell you, we talked about the 3 different schools I went to. I visit colleges every year. We take tours. This is part of our professional organization's requirement, but it's part of our joy, right? This is part of what we love to do, is to learn about learning and sites. So when I visit, every single one has had something there that made me go, ooh, I'd like that here. I'd like, why can't I go back to college, right? And I don't just mean climbing walls and, and great cafeterias, because there are some with those things. Okay, fine, right? There's something to be excited about. So when we talk about making a balanced list of schools to apply to, some people use this term, right? Safety and target and reach. And then people think, oh no, you only got into your safeties. Like, please don't look at it that way. Just because it accepts more students doesn't mean it's wrong for you. This whole thought that if they'll accept me, they must not be that picky. Oh, come on. Why are we doing that to ourselves and to our kids? Right? Pick places that find something that would be exciting to you at each one of them, whether they accept 70% or 7%.
100% agree with that. So much better to just sort of focus. The focus here should be on that short list of good fit institutions. And there might be one among those that you actually think is a good fit. You're not applying to it just because it's fashionable or whatever. It's a good fit, but it is quote unquote more selective. Just realize that means that the admissions officer at that particular school are going to be sorting through 40,000 applications. So if you don't get in, it could be because somebody was really tired the day they read that application. Just don't put this huge weight on whether or not you get into that particular school. There is a numbers game here that seriously affects the way college admissions work.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in some ways, some of the work Michele and I each do is a little bit like being a really good librarian. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure you guys have all had the experience when you took your kid to the library and they had exhausted whatever series they were just so into and, went up to the library and I loved this. What else will I like if I loved this series? And I think, that's some place where I think we both add a lot of value into the process is like, well, if you loved this school with their 3.4% acceptance rate, tell me what you liked about it, other than it's on the U.S. News and World Report, highly ranked. And if you can define that quality, well, okay, great. Let's take that same quality and we will help you find schools with, a 30% admittance rate that has that same quality you're seeking. And in fact, or 60% admit rate. And in fact, there's a free app floating around out there called Loper, Loper. I like it for a couple reasons. First of all, it's free. I am always going to gravitate toward free. Secondly, it's like a dating app for colleges, which I really appreciate. And why I like it is so a kid literally swipes left, swipes right based on different qualities of the school. And if you don't know, colleges. It's Tinder for colleges. And
I'm sorry, I'm probably not supposed to know what Tinder is, but I do watch SVU. So,
well, what I love about it is if a kid doesn't know what it's talking about, like how important is a quarter system to you? It literally there's a button and the kid can just click and it defines what this is. So the kid is learning. And then after a few swipes, it's like, oh, we have some matches for you. You want to see them? And you're like, yes, I'm interested. And it does not tell you the name of the college at first. It says you were suggesting this because you said XYZ is important and this school has XYZ. Still interested? Yes. Then and only then does it tell you the college name. So it's not a perfect app. It sometimes comes back with some crazy results, but I love it because it breaks families away from that name brand obsession and introduces new possibilities that actually are accessible and in many instances pretty easy to apply to.
So I think it sounds like one of the things related to not being emotionally invested in a particular school is you can't shape your child's high school program around their odds of getting into one particular school. And this is something that I see a lot with parents who have sort of gotten fixated on the quote unquote selective or Ivy League schools, is that they are pushing their kids into all upper level courses, all AP courses, all of these really rigorous academic pursuits for the, I would almost say, sole purpose of having the transcript look impressive to one particular school. Again, as Michele, you said, it's a moonshot to get into a selective college anyway. So how does pushing your kids into all upper level courses disadvantage them?
Burn them out, for one.
Yeah.
That's...
We have seen that too.
Yes. And we've seen the mental health crisis is real in young people, and colleges see it too. So sometimes we get kids who have struggled during high school. Sometimes that's why they're coming to homeschooling, right? Sometimes kids manage the pressure cooker all the way through, whether they're homeschool or high school, and then they get to college and all bets are off, right? If they have not built the tools that they need to deal with whatever mental health challenge they might have, or stress or anxiety, it's really tough being a kid right now. I mean, we all say, right, oh, in our generation, we had to do this or that. There's a lot for this generation. We don't want to add to that. You want to let the kid be their joyful, real selves, authentic selves.
Yeah.
And just adding on to that, particularly if parents are opting for dual enrollment in high school, you better be sure your kid is ready for that. So, a place like ASU lets you kind of try it before you buy it. And if you get a grade you like, you can pay to have it put on the transcript. But for the vast majority of places, if you are taking a dual enrolled class, that is starting your official record. And I think sometimes parents think, well, if they tank or they don't do well, I just won't put that anywhere. And they fail to realize
that way.
No, it doesn't work that way. There's a national clearinghouse. Colleges will know if you have taken. Right. So you better make sure your kid is actually ready for that material, because the degree of independence that is required is significantly more more. Also, I will say that sometimes parents go into it rather naively in dual enrollment, and particularly in classes that are value laden or literature rich. Sometimes they can have an expectation that the instructor is going to match what their parameters are in their own family. And that is absolutely not true. So your student is going to be dealing with very adult material oftentimes. And so you just have to make sure that they have the emotional bandwidth to deal with that. Certainly nobody wants a student exposed to a topic that is well outside the family's comfort zone, or one that is simply, beyond their emotional grasp at that particular moment. So those are all things to consider as you're contemplating dual enrollment or super high power advanced classes.
There's certainly
no, go ahead, Michele.
There's certainly kids who are really advanced academically, right? Whether they're gifted or in a particular area or broadly, that are far ahead of what the standard school system said. Remember, development isn't just stair step, everybody does the same thing at the same time, right? So sometimes it's asynchronous, and a kid can be way ahead in math or way ahead in English. But emotionally is so, so important, what Holly just said. Also, the pushing them, that shows. It's much better to say that the kid did this because they loved it, both for their mental health and for demonstrating that this is real, this is what they want to do. When they go farther on, it's so much more important. In colleges, of course, they look, and you go to any info session and they'll say, we're going to compare your academic record to what was available in your school, right? We're going to look, if you're trying to get into a more academically rigorous college, they're going to look and say, well, your school had honors classes or your school had AP classes. What did you do? Did you take advantage of the opportunities that were there for you? With homeschooling, the sky's the limit, right? So it's not just that, well, there's 12 APs, and as a freshman in this high school, you can't take any, and as a sophomore, you can take one. And did you do that, right? Schools are trying to also say, don't max out, because they recognize the whole kid needs to not just be pushing and maxing out, right? The high schools limit that. We need to also recognize that our kid needs time to be kid, needs time to run in the woods, needs time to develop who they really want to be. And as one of our friends who's an admissions officer is fond of saying, he's a little sad when he sees a homeschool record that's all these APs and high-powered academics and nothing unique. Because when you're homeschool, what you can take advantage of is doing that really different thing. Falconry is one example he gives, and blacksmithing, right? Those are not typical high school topics.
Well, and so, so we've done these 4 don'ts, and there's one more thing I want to add to this last don't push your kids into all upper level courses. We've got 4 whole do's, and each one of them is just as interesting as the 4 don'ts that we've just done. So we want to give Holly and Michele all of the time they need to share their expertise. So what we're going to do is, we've done this on the fly, we're going to wrap this episode up, and we're going to do another episode. Look for it in your podcast feed with the 4 do's. And we're going to turn a lot of these things that we have talked about around and say, how can you put these things to use to I don't want to even say get your child into college, to launch your child into the next phase of learning, because that's really, really what we're talking about here. I did want to say something about pushing kids into all upper level courses. So maybe we'll just wrap up with this, if you don't mind me monopolizing the end of this episode. And this is from I'm a humanities person. I taught writing and literature on the college level, and I have 4 kids who are all more humanities focused. So you math and science types can send your comments to Susanna about what I'm about to say. But I really do feel that when you're talking about upper level courses, there is a particular challenge with literature courses with younger students who they may be super bright, super engaged, great readers, great writers. But when you're dealing with upper level literature, you are talking about family dysfunction. You are talking about sexual violence. You are talking about sexual identity. You are talking about racism. You are talking about hatred. There are so many aspects of great literature that a a really smart 17-year-old can't quite yet get their arms around. And particularly pushing children who are super bright, and I was one of those, but not emotionally mature, again, I was there, into upper level literature courses can just be kind of disastrous. And sometimes you just got to take a breath. And I say this all the time, let the earth go around the sun one more time, and think about what's good for the student, not what's going to look good on their college transcript. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Good.
So
I'm
much.
getting nods from our guests.
Oh, yes. So important.
Yeah.
And thank you, Holly and Michele, for giving us so many tangible resources for parents. As we were talking, I'll have all of these links in the show notes. And that way we're going to close out this episode here. And like Susan said, be ready to check out the do's of the college admissions process next time. Thank you for listening to the Well-Trained Mind podcast. You can find Susan at facebook.com/susan.wise.bauer and Susanna on Instagram at hopintohomeschool. Our engineering and mixing is done by AJ Falari at ajfalari.online. This podcast is produced by Well-Trained Mind Press, and our supervising producer is Chris Bauer. If you enjoyed the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have questions, responses, or ideas for future episodes, email us at podcast@welltrainedmind.com. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.